I once used dirty tricks to force the girl my parents sponsored to stay with me. I spoiled her rotten. I cooked for her, washed her clothes, and even paid to cure her grandmother's paralysis. Later, my parents were framed and died in a horrific accident, and my enemies left a sharp metal fragment wedged deep in my brain. The doctors said I wouldn't live past 5 years. But she turned around and held the hand of my enemy's son. I knew he was the one that got away, her first love. She had always hated me for tearing them apart. So I turned around and left, brokenhearted. 5 years later, we met again. She was now the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, publicly announcing her engagement to her first love. And I had become a homeless beggar, clinging to my last breaths, dragged down to the absolute dirt. Once again, I turned to leave, my heart bleeding. But on the grand stage, tears streamed down her face as she ran toward me. My parents were framed and met a tragic death. Our family business went bankrupt. And my enemies left a sharp metal fragment wedged deep in my brain during the assault. The doctor told me I wouldn't survive past the 5th year. This year is my last. I thought I would just die quietly in some forgotten corner. But on Valentine's Day, while I was digging through a trash can, I saw Serafina Vance standing in front of a luxury hotel. She was wearing a custom-made gown, dripping in diamonds, looking breathtakingly rich and powerful. My hand froze in the trash. I stared at her blankly, my nose stinging with tears. After all, she is now a high and mighty female billionaire, no longer the helpless little girl I used to tease. Just then, a man walked up to her. It was Julian Sterling, the son of the man who ruined my family. My fists clenched so hard my knuckles turned white. Sarah gently took his arm, a soft smile playing on her lips. Looking at them, it finally clicked. She is getting engaged to Julian. Get the hell away, you filthy hobo. A harsh shout snapped me back to reality. I looked at the security guard who was raising a hand to strike me, and I quickly scrambled away, trembling. The guard sneered and walked off. I reached into my pocket and touched the few crumpled dollar bills I had. It wasn't even enough to buy my pain medication anymore. I decided to try another dumpster down the street, hoping to find something I could recycle for a few cents. But suddenly, Sarah appeared right in front of me, staring at me with an intense, unreadable gaze. I quickly buried my head deeper into the dumpster. Did she recognize me? The thought made my entire body shake uncontrollably. She must find me so pathetic, so hilarious right now. At that moment, Julian walked over, holding a takeout box and handed it to Sarah. Are you hungry? Here, take this, Sarah said, handing the box to me with a gentle smile. I had dirt rubbed all over my face. I kept my head low and whispered a raspy, thank you. Julian frowned, pinching his nose. Sarah, you are always too kind to these street rats. Sarah stared at me deeply, because I know what it's like to starve. Fine. It reeks here anyway, let's go. With that, Julian tossed 2 $20 bills onto the ground, pulled Sarah and walked away. I stared at her retreating figure, and carefully picked up the money. Then, I let out a self-deprecating laugh. What are you dreaming about, Ethan? How could she ever recognize you? After all, I am just a disgusting beggar now, someone people avoid like the plague. My chest ached with a bitter, hollow pain. I remembered the first time I met her. She was as timid as a stray kitten. I learned about her life from my parents. Her parents died when she was young. Her grandmother was half paralyzed, and little Sarah had to become the adult of the house. She only slept 5 hours a day, waking up before dawn to care for her bedridden Nana. She had to cook and clean. Because she couldn't reach the stove, she had to stand on a small wooden stool. Her life was just too brutal. I wanted to save her. I begged my parents to use their foundation to sponsor her. Because of us, her grandmother was finally admitted to a proper hospital. She used to look at me with those timid, fearful eyes, and I would just laugh and gently ruffle her hair. Later, I took her to amusement parks, went shopping with her, treated her to nice dinners, and watched movies. Everything was brand new to her, but whenever I tried to buy her gifts, she would always shake her head and refuse. It only made my heart break for her more. As the years passed, I spoiled her to the heavens, and she became more and more dependent on me. She called my parents Mom and Dad, but she never called me brother. I didn't care. There seemed to be a silent, unspoken bond between us. Until high school, when Julian Sterling suddenly confessed his love to her. Julian was the son of my family's rival, a total spoiled playboy. I didn't know if he was doing it just to spite me, but he constantly pursued her right in front of my face. I thought Sarah would ignore him, but under Julian's relentless romantic gestures, a smile finally appeared on her face when she looked at him. Eventually, when he confessed again, she accepted his flowers. That day, I got into a massive fistfight with Julian. For the first time in my life, I wanted to kill someone. But Sarah threw herself in front of him, crying, begging me to leave him alone. Rage consumed me. I yelled at her. Do you have any idea what kind of guy Julian is? The Sterlings and the Greys have been sworn enemies for decades. She stared back at me stubbornly. This is my personal life, Ethan. Stay out of it. I glared at her. Don't forget, you're practically my sister. Hearing that, Sarah became even more emotional. I am not your sister. I don't ever want to be your sister. My anger flared to the absolute limit. I didn't understand what was so good about Julian that she was so blind. Pushing her against the wall in a fit of pure, toxic jealousy, I growled. Sarah, you love Julian that much? Well, I'm not going to let you have him. You don't want us to be family? Fine. From today on, you are going to be my girlfriend. If you refuse, I'll have my parents cut off your funding, and you can take your sick grandmother and drag yourselves back to the streets. Her eyes welled with tears. After a long, agonizing silence, she finally nodded. I didn't know what those words truly did to her. I only knew that from that day on, she never smiled again. Looking at her red, teary eyes, I felt a deep, gnawing guilt. So, I tried even harder to please her. She had a weak stomach, so I personally learned how to cook delicate meals, cutting my fingers dozens of times in the process. She hated the smell of smoke, so I forced my father to completely quit smoking. I thought that as time passed, we would eventually find real happiness together. But shortly after, tragedy struck. My parents were framed and died. Our company was liquidated. I was kidnapped, beaten within an inch of my life, and ended up with a metal fragment embedded in my skull. The doctors told me I wouldn't survive past 5 years, unless I underwent an extremely expensive and risky surgery. Then came the news that Sarah's grandmother was on her deathbed. I gritted my teeth and used the very last of my hidden savings to pay for her grandmother's emergency surgery. To avoid dragging Sarah down with me, I decided to see her one last time before leaving forever. But when I found her, she was holding Julian's hand. I touched the scar on my head, let out a bitter laugh, and stumbled away into the rain, tears streaming down my face. I had absolutely nothing left. To escape other creditors and enemies, I fled to another city. Because of the brain injury, I couldn't hold down a normal job. My vision would blur, and the migraines were blinding. Slowly, I became a beggar, fighting stray dogs for scraps of food. In this, the final year of my life, I returned to this city. I wanted to die where I was born. And deep down, I wanted to see her one last time before I closed my eyes forever. After all, the only reasons I had dragged this broken body along for 5 years were, first, to find out the truth about my parents' deaths. Second, to understand why Sarah had betrayed us. After my parents died, the Sterling family sponsored her college education. And the moment she graduated, they made her the CEO of the Sterling Group. She became the ultimate icon of success for every young woman in the country. Just a few days ago, the Sterlings announced that Sarah and Julian were getting engaged. That night, fireworks lit up the entire city skyline. The streets were filled with celebratory candy. I picked one up and ate it, but it tasted incredibly bitter. I had thought about going straight to her to demand answers. But looking at my filthy, mangled reflection in a shop window, I could only laugh at myself. As I thought about this, my head began to throb violently. The cheap painkillers weren't working anymore. The only relief was to close my eyes and try to sleep. In my semi-conscious state, I was shaken awake by a group of loud, obnoxious drunks. Hey, look at this little hobo sleeping so peacefully. I can't even get a good night's sleep. Why does this piece of trash get to sleep so well? Wake him up. Before my brain could fully register what was happening, the drunks began to kick me, pouring cheap beer all over my head. I tried to stand up and push them away, but a wave of intense dizziness hit me. I crashed to the ground, shattering a glass bottle. This angered the drunks even more. They kicked me brutally several times before finally laughing and walking away. My torn skin burned fiercely from the alcohol. I tried to crawl forward, but my palm pressed hard into the shattered glass, blood instantly pooling on the pavement. I guess this is it. I'm finally going to die. I lay flat on the cold ground, accepting my fate. Suddenly, Sarah appeared in front of me. Tears were pooling in her eyes as she stared at me, frozen. My heart shattered. I buried my face into the dirty pavement, curling my body into a tight ball. I didn't want her to recognize me. I scrambled desperately to crawl toward a dark alley, one hand covered in blood, the other in mud. But she stepped in front of me, blocking my path. Go away. Get lost. I forced my voice to sound raspy and wild, playing the part of a terrified, crazed beggar. The air went dead silent. I thought I heard the sound of quiet sobbing, but I didn't dare look up to confirm it. After a long time she spoke, her voice trembling but cold. Ethan Gray, how long are you going to pretend you don't know me? In the hospital, a young nurse wrapped my wounds with an expression of pure disgust. I sat on the edge of the bed, incredibly uncomfortable. How long has it been since you showered? You smell horrific. Even with 3 masks on, I can still smell you. And your hair, it's so matted and filthy it's disgusting. Once I'm done with you, I need to take a shower immediately and disinfect this entire room. This is so annoying. I lowered my head, not daring to say a word. Just then Sarah walked in, carrying a takeout box. Hearing the nurse's complaints, her face instantly turned ice cold. She glared at the nurse with absolute fury. Say one more word, and I will personally ensure you are fired from this hospital within the hour. The nurse turned pale with fear, quickly finished the bandage, and rushed out of the room. Sarah placed the food container in front of me. Eat, she said quietly. I carefully opened the box. She frowned slightly. I didn't realize there were fried fish fillets in there. I'm sorry. I kept my head down and smiled bitterly. It's fine. I actually like fish now. Sarah used to love fish. I had spent weeks learning how to cook fish perfectly just for her. But I had never eaten it myself because I hated the smell of seafood. But after years on the streets, let alone fish, I would have eaten a bone snatched from a stray dog's mouth. I began to wolf down the food, including the fried fish. Watching me, Sarah whispered, "You've changed so much." I knew exactly what she meant. In the past, not only did I refuse to eat fish, but I also had extremely refined table manners. I used to chew every bite exactly 30 times before swallowing. When I first became homeless, I tried to maintain those habits. But once the hunger and the sickness truly set in, you quickly throw away all those stupid, elegant rules. Being messy and alive is always better than starving to death with manners. After I finished the food and the 4-drip was done, Sarah took me to a hotel so I could shower. She even bought a brand new set of clothes for me. I didn't refuse. After all, my parents had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars sponsoring her when we were young. Eating a meal and wearing some clothes paid for by her now was nothing. Besides, I wanted to use this opportunity to have a final talk with her. I carefully washed my body, trying not to touch my fresh wounds. I didn't wash my hair, fearing the hotel shampoo would irritate the deep scar on my skull. When I stepped out of the bathroom, she was sitting on the sofa, her face cold. "Why didn't you wash your hair? Doesn't having that filthy nest on your head disgust you?" Her icy tone made me instinctively bow my head. I didn't plan on telling her about the metal fragment in my skull. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, her phone rang. It was Julian. "Babe, someone said they saw you checking into a hotel with a beggar. What's going on?" Sarah glanced at me, her eyes softening slightly as she stepped out onto the balcony to take the call. Seeing this, my self-esteem shattered again. A familiar pain gripped my heart. The questions I wanted to ask died in my throat. What was the point of asking anyway? My parents are dead. I am dying. And she has a brand new, glamorous life. From the very beginning, the person she loved was never me. I took a long, hard look at her back. I quietly grabbed the free hotel toiletries and bottles of water, planning to slip away. These free items, worthless to her, were precious commodities for a beggar like me. But just as I stepped into the elevator, Sarah rushed over and blocked the doors. "Ethan Gray, are you going to run away without a word again, just like you did 5 years ago?" She grabbed my arm and yanked me out of the elevator. I tripped over my own clumsy feet and fell hard onto the carpet. All the stolen toiletries and water bottles tumbled out of my pockets, rolling across the floor. Silence fell over the hallway. I quietly sat there, gathering the items one by one. I kept my head down. "You must think I'm incredibly pathetic, don't you?" She didn't answer. The silence was suffocating. I clutched the cheap items to my chest, reaching out to press the elevator button again. But she grabbed my hand, her eyes red and filled with tears. "I just think you are as incredibly selfish and stubborn as always." I remained silent. Suddenly, she threw her arms around me, pulling me into a tight embrace. Her fingers ran through my messy hair, accidentally brushing against the painful scar on my skull. With a sob in her voice, she whispered, "Ethan, this time, let me save you, okay?" My body went completely stiff. But after a second, I gently but firmly pushed her away. "Sarah, my parents were ruined and died because of the Sterlings. While they are flying high, and you are climbing up their corporate ladder. Doesn't your conscience ever hurt?" My words hung in the sterile hallway like an executioner's blade. "Doesn't your conscience ever hurt?" I watched Serafina's face. I expected her to flinch, to flare up with defensive anger, or to look away in shame. Instead, her pupils constricted, and the color drained from her cheeks until she was as pale as the marble tiles beneath our feet. Her lips parted, trembling slightly, but no sound came out. "Ethan." Her voice cracked, a fragile, hollow whisper. "Is that what you think? That I sold myself to the people who murdered your parents just to wear diamond necklaces and sit in a corner office?" I looked down at my battered hands, the grime embedded so deep into my fingernails that no single shower could ever wash it away. "You're wearing their clothes. You're running their company. You're marrying their son," I said, my voice hoarse, devoid of warmth or strength. "What else am I supposed to think?" She took a ragged breath. For a second, her composure shattered. The ruthless, untouchable CEO of the Sterling Group looked like the terrified 14-year-old girl who used to hide behind my back when thunder rattled the windows of our old home. She reached out, her fingers catching the rough fabric of my new sleeve. "Come with me. I won't let you stay on the streets. Not for another second." "I don't need your charity, Sarah. I rasped, pulling away. Save your pity for someone who has a future. Before I could turn toward the emergency exit stairs, a sharp, searing spike of pain exploded behind my left eye. It wasn't a normal headache. It was the familiar, agonizing sensation of the jagged shrapnel lodged against my cerebral cortex shifting, a slow, hot needle, slicing through neural tissue. My vision went pitch black. The world tilted sideways. I heard the plastic shampoo bottles clatter across the floor as my knees buckled. My breath hitched in my throat, a dry, choked gasp tearing from my chest. Ethan. Sarah's arms caught me before my skull hit the floor. She dropped to her knees, heedless of her custom silk skirt, dragging my heavy, trembling frame against her chest. Her hands were frantic, cupping the back of my head, feeling the burning heat radiating from the deep, jagged scar beneath my matted hair. No, no, no. Ethan, stay with me. Look at me, she cried, her voice rising into a panicked shriek. Someone call an ambulance. Call Dr. Thorne right now. Don't waste your time. I wheezed, blood trickling from my left nostril, hot and metallic against my upper lip. 5 years, it's over. Shut up. Shut your mouth, she sobbed, pressing her forehead against mine, her tears mixing with the blood and sweat on my face. You don't get to die, Ethan. Gray. You spent your whole life deciding everything for me. You don't get to decide when you leave me alone in this hell. As the darkness swallowed my consciousness whole, the last thing I felt was the desperate, thundering beat of her heart against my ribs. When I opened my eyes again, the scent of damp garbage and rotting alleyways was gone. In its place was the subtle, calming fragrance of white sandalwood and medical-grade lavender. I was lying in an enormous king-sized bed, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling, panoramic windows overlooking the glowing skyline of the city. A continuous, intravenous drip was hooked to the back of my left hand, pumping a cool, soothing analgesic directly into my bloodstream. The blinding migraine had subsided into a dull, manageable ache. I looked down. My filthy clothes had been removed, replaced by clean cotton pajamas. My hair was clean, soft, and trimmed neatly around the edges of the jagged cranial scar. I sat up slowly, the room swaying slightly with residual vertigo. The room wasn't a hospital ward. It was a master bedroom inside a private, high-rise penthouse. On the nightstand sat a glass of warm water, a plate of steamed egg custard, the exact dish I used to cook for Sarah when her stomach ulcer flared up, and a small brass key. Beside the nightstand, the door to the walk-in closet was slightly ajar. I swung my legs over the bed, testing my weight. My limbs were weak, but the painkillers had restored some semblance of mobility. I pushed the closet door open. Inside, there were no designer dresses or high-end suits. The entire walk-in closet had been converted into a high-security archive. Steel filing cabinets lined the walls, and a massive corkboard was covered in thousands of documents, photographs, bank ledgers, and surveillance transcripts, connected by crimson threads. At the top of the board, circled in red ink, was a single name, Julian Sterling, and Arthur Sterling, Sterling Holdings. My breath hitched. I walked closer, my trembling fingers brushing against the documents pinned to the cork. Autopsy report. Richard and Eleanor Gray, cause of death, brake hydraulic. Tampering, October 14th. Offshore shell accounts. Cayman Islands ledger detailing the wire transfer from Sterling Capital to the mechanic who altered the Gray family vehicle. Corporate equity infiltration. 42% of Sterling Group shares secretly acquired through anonymous blind trusts under the name me.I. Heritage Foundation. Beneath the board was a heavy oak desk covered in medical journals. Every single paper was bookmarked with yellow sticky notes. Advances in deep brain metallic foreign body extraction via microlaser ablation. Dr. Kenneth Thorne, Chief of Neurosurgery, Zurich Medical Institute, retained on permanent standby. Total surgical retainer paid $4,500,000. At the center of the desk lay a small, worn velvet box. I opened it. Inside was the cheap silver-plated dolphin hair clip I had bought for Sarah at a street night market when she was 15 years old. The silver was tarnished, but the clasp was polished until it gleamed. Beneath the velvet box was a handwritten diary, its pages swollen from dried tears. I opened to the entry dated 5 years ago, the night I had seen her holding Julian's hand in the hospital corridor. Ethan paid for Grandma's surgery with the last penny he had. He didn't know I saw the blood on his shirt from when Julian's men ambushed him. He thinks I accepted Julian because I'm shallow. He thinks I hate him. Let him hate me. If he stays near me, Arthur Sterling will finish the job and kill him. I took Julian's hand tonight so Arthur would call off the hitmen. I promised to enter the Sterling Group and manage their dirty books. Every document I copy, every share I secretly divert, brings me one step closer to burning their empire to the ground. Ethan, please stay alive. Please hide well. When I take their heads, I will come. Find you, even if I have to dig through every sewer in this country. A single, scalding tear dropped onto the yellowed page, blurring the ink. My throat closed up so tight I couldn't breathe. All these years. Every cold winter night I spent shivering under cardboard boxes, cursing her name, wishing I had never brought her into my home. She had been living in the lion's den, letting the beasts chew on her flesh just to keep the hunters away from me. You weren't supposed to see that yet. I whipped around. Serafina stood in the doorway of the closet. She was wearing a simple black cashmere sweater, her hair tied in a loose ponytail, holding a tray with a fresh pot of herbal tea. Her eyes were rimmed with red, dark shadows bruising the delicate skin beneath them. Ugh. My voice was barely a whisper, thick with uncontainable grief and guilt. Why didn't you tell me? Tell you. She gave a small, bitter smile, setting the tray on the desk. Tell you that the boy you fought in high school was the son of a psychopath who had been planning to bankrupt your father for a decade? Tell you that I knew about your brain injury the day after it happened. She walked up to me, her eyes boring into mine with an intensity that burned. If I told you, Ethan, with your ridiculous, arrogant hero complex, you would have charged into the Sterling estate with a knife and gotten yourself slaughtered. You would have died trying to protect me. And you thought becoming Julian's pet was better? I roared, the anger surging through my veins, not at her, but at my own pathetic, helpless weakness. You let him touch you. You let him parade you around the city as his trophy. He never touched me, Sarah said, her voice dropping into an icy absolute stillness. I froze. Every dinner, every gala, every photo op was an orchestrated business transaction, she said, tapping the financial dossiers on the desk. Julian Sterling is a cowardly narcissist who only cares about appearances and power. Thought having Richard Gray's sponsored girl working as his executive dog was the ultimate proof of his family's victory. I gave him the illusion of control, and in return he gave me access to their financial servers. She reached out, her cool fingertips gently touching the scar along my hairline. I didn't let him lay a single finger on me, Ethan. Not once. Because the only person who has ever owned my heart, my soul, and my life is the idiot standing right in front of me. Before I could speak, the heavy electronic lock on the penthouse's front door let out a series of frantic, high-pitched chimes. Beep 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 clack. The front door swung open with a violent thud. Sarah? Where the hell are you? Julian's voice echoed through the marble foyer, slick, arrogant, and laced with suppressed rage. Sarah's expression hardened instantly. The vulnerable, weeping girl vanished behind an impenetrable mask of absolute, corporate frost. Stay in the closet. Don't make a sound, she whispered, pulling the heavy, mirrored door until it was nearly flush with the wall. Through the 2-inch gap in the frame, I saw Julian stride into the master suite. He was wearing a custom double-breasted charcoal suit, holding a crystal glass, half filled with amber scotch. His tie was loosened, his slicked-back hair slightly disheveled, his eyes bloodshot with suspicion. Julian, Sarah said calmly, stepping out to block his path toward the closet. What are you doing here? We have the pre-engagement press conference in 3 hours. I came to see what kind of stray dog my fiancé was hiding in her private residence, Julian sneered, slamming his scotch glass down onto the nightstand, splashing liquor over the warm custard. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the unmade bed and the 4-drip stand. My security guards told me you cleared out an entire VIP floor at Central Hospital yesterday afternoon. Julian stepped closer to Sarah, his voice dropping into a menacing hiss. And this morning, someone saw your private car picking up a dirty bum from the alleyway behind the Regent Hotel. Julian grabbed Sarah by the chin, forcing her face up. Tell me, darling, did our little beggar boy finally come back from the dead? Behind the closet door, my fists clenched so hard my fingernails broke the skin of my palms. Every instinct screamed at me to kick the door open and smash Julian's skull against the marble mantelpiece. But my eyes caught the files on the desk, the 5 years of blood, sweat, and terror Sarah had endured to set this trap. If I acted rashly now, I would burn her masterpiece to ashes. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't swat Julian's hand away. She simply looked into his eyes with a flat, condescending coldness that made Julian's grip loosen. Involuntarily, Arthur Sterling's offshore shell company in Panama was audited by the International Maritime Authority this morning, Sarah said smoothly, her tone as light as if she were discussing the weather. Julian's face stiffened. What? If the board of directors discovers that $40 million was diverted from the logistics subsidiary to cover your illegal sports betting debts in Macau, your father won't just remove you from the CEO succession line, Julian. He'll cut your throat himself. Julian took a step back, his sneer evaporating into a mask of ugly, defensive panic. How do you know about Macau? I know everything that enters and leaves this company, Sarah walked past him, picking up her tablet from the dresser. The beggar was a distraction. I used his name to authorize an emergency cash disbursement from the foundation account to cover your trail before the board convened. Julian stared at her, caught between profound paranoia and desperate relief. You covered for me. I protect the Sterling Group because my future is tied to it, Sarah said, turning around to fix him with a sharp, piercing glare. If you want to play the jealous fiancé, do it after the engagement is finalized tonight. Until then, get out of my penthouse and make sure your father signs the equity transfer agreement before the press conference. Julian swallowed hard, adjusting his cufflinks to mask his trembling fingers. He let out a nervous, breathless laugh. You really are a cold-blooded bitch, Sarah. That's why I love you. He leaned in, attempting to kiss her cheek. Sarah smoothly turned her head, picking up her coat from the armchair, letting his lips graze only empty air. See you at the gala, Julian. Julian's eyes darkened with humiliated spite, but he knew better than to push her when she held his financial leash. He picked up his scotch glass, drained it in one gulp, and slammed the front door shut behind him. The moment the lock engaged, Sarah collapsed against the wall, her legs trembling so violently she had to slide down to the floor to catch her breath. I stepped out from the closet, hurried to her side, and pulled her shivering frame into my arms. Sarah? Tonight, she whispered, her fingers clutching the front of my shirt with desperate, unyielding strength. Tonight, the board of directors and every major media outlet in the country will be at the Grand Hyatt Ballroom. The police, the federal prosecutors, and the forensic accountants have all received the dossier. She looked up at me, her eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying brilliance. Tonight, Ethan, the Sterling family dies. By 4 p.m., the storm outside had turned into a relentless blizzard, coating the city in a thick sheet of white ice. Inside the penthouse, the silence was broken only by the rhythmic, labored sound of my breathing. As the hour of the gala approached, my body began to fail with brutal, accelerated velocity. The temporary relief from the hospital's intravenous painkillers had worn off. A high fever burned through my veins, making my skin flush hot while my teeth chattered uncontrollably. My peripheral vision in my left eye had vanished entirely, replaced by a flickering gray static. Sarah knelt beside the bed, carefully buttoning the cuffs of a tailored charcoal suit she had bought for me, a suit made to the exact measurements of the 20-year-old Ethan Gray from 5 years ago. Dr. Thorne arrived in the city 2 hours ago, Sarah said softly, her hands trembling as she adjusted my silk tie. He's setting up the private surgical suite at St. Jude's. The moment the press conference ends, we are going straight to the hospital. I looked at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The clean suit, the combed hair, and the polished shoes could not hide the hollow, sunken contours of my cheeks or the pale, bloodless hue of my lips. I looked like a ghost dressed in the clothes of a living man. Sarah, I said, catching her wrists. Listen to me. No, she said instantly, refusing to look up. Don't say it. The doctor told me 5 years ago that the surgery had an 80% mortality rate. I said, keeping my voice calm, steady, and resolute. The fragment is lodged millimeters from the brainstem. If I don't survive tonight, you will survive, she yelled, slamming her palms against my knees, tears bursting from her eyes like a broken dam. You have to survive. I didn't spend 5 years swallowing poison just to bury you at the finish line. I pulled her into my lap, wrapping my arms tightly around her shoulders, resting my chin against her hair. If I die, Sarah, I whispered into her ear, you are free. You don't owe my parents anything. You don't owe me anything. You take the money, you take the company, and you live the brightest, happiest life this world can give you. Promise me. She buried her face into the crook of my neck, weeping until her body shook, but she refused to utter the word promise. Instead, she pulled back, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and took a small black velvet box from her purse. She opened it. Inside was my father's platinum signet ring, the heirloom that Julian's father had stolen from my father's corpse 5 years ago. I took this back from Arthur Sterling's safe last week, Sarah said, sliding the heavy ring onto my right ring finger. It fit perfectly. You are the rightful heir of the Gray family, she said, her voice turning into steel. Tonight you walk into that ballroom as a king. The grand ballroom of the Hyatt Regency was a sea of glittering crystal, flashing paparazzi cameras, and the murmur of 200 of the country's most powerful corporate elites. On the elevated stage, a massive golden banner read, celebrating the merger of Sterling Holdings and the engagement of Julian Sterling and Serafina Vance. Arthur Sterling, a portly, silver-haired man with ruthless, predatory eyes, stood near the podium, shaking hands with city council members and banking executives. Beside him, Julian stood tall in a midnight blue tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne, soaking in the admiration of the crowd like a conquering prince. "Where is your bride-to-be, Julian?" a journalist from the Financial Chronicle asked, holding up a microphone. "We hear Miss Vance has finalized the acquisition of the southern ports." Julian smiled smugly, checking his diamond Rolex. "Sarah is always meticulous with the final paperwork. She'll be here in 5 minutes to sign the merger documents and present the new corporate charter." Right on cue, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The room fell into an immediate, expectant hush. Serafina Vance walked down the red carpet. She was breathtaking. She wore an off-the-shoulder crimson gown that trailed behind her like liquid fire, her diamond choker catching the chandelier light. Her posture was straight, her chin raised, exuding an aura of absolute, unyielding majesty. Julian grinned, stepping forward with outstretched arms. "Sarah, darling, you're just in time." His voice died in his throat. Julian froze. Arthur Sterling froze. The entire room went dead silent. Walking behind Serafina, step by deliberate step, was a tall, broad-shouldered young man in a charcoal suit. Though his face was pale and a subtle, dark scar ran along his left temple, every single veteran executive in that room recognized the sharp, aristocratic jawline, the piercing obsidian eyes, and the unmistakable platinum signet ring. On his right hand, "Ethan Gray," an older board member whispered, his glass slipping from his hand, shattering across the carpet. "Impossible." Arthur Sterling gasped, his face draining of all color. "He died in the river 5 years ago." "I apologize for the delay, ladies and gentlemen." Sarah's voice rang out through the wireless microphone, clear, cold, and amplified across the hall. She walked past Julian as if he were a piece of rotting wood, stepping directly onto the center of the stage. "Tonight's celebration is indeed a merger," Sarah continued, pointing toward the massive projector screen behind the stage. "A merger between the Sterling Group and the State Department of Criminal Justice." Click. The screen flickered to life. Instead of romantic engagement photos and corporate merger charts, the giant screen lit up with high-resolution scans of forensic evidence. 1. Audio recording, October 12, 5 years ago. Arthur Sterling's voice blaring through the speakers. "Make sure the brake lines on Richard Gray's Mercedes are cut clean. Let it look like an accident on the highway. Once the parents are dead, we liquidate the Gray shares at 5 cents on the dollar." 2. Bank transfer records. $3 million wired directly from Julian Sterling's private account to the gang that kidnapped and assaulted Ethan Gray, explicitly ordering them to break his skull and bury him in the concrete. 3. Federal indictment notice, sealing the immediate asset seizure of Sterling holdings for money laundering, murder for hire, and commercial racketeering. A deafening uproar exploded across the ballroom. Paparazzi flashbulbs erupted like a thunderstorm. Reporters were shouting, typing frantically on their laptops, while dozens of uniformed federal agents and armed police officers stormed through the ballroom side exits surrounding the stage. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" Arthur Sterling screamed, clutching his chest, his face turning an apoplectic shade of purple as he lunged for the audio-visual console. 2 federal marshals intercepted him instantly, forcing his arms behind his back and slamming steel handcuffs onto his wrists. "Arthur Sterling, you are under arrest for first-degree conspiracy to commit murder, corporate fraud, and racketeering," the lead agent announced. Julian stood in the center of the stage, his mind snapping under the weight of the total, instantaneous collapse of his world. He looked at the police, looked at his handcuffed father, and finally looked at Sarah standing beside me, her hand firmly intertwined with mine. "You," Julian whispered, his veins bulging along his neck, his teeth bared in a feral, manic snarl. "You bitch. You planned this. From the very first day you accepted my flowers in high school. You were using me." "You're wrong, Julian," Sarah said, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "In high school, I ignored you because you were pathetic. But the moment your father killed Richard and Eleanor Gray, you stopped being pathetic. You became a debt that had to be paid in blood." "I'll kill you," Julian shrieked, losing his mind entirely. He reached inside his tuxedo jacket, pulling out a concealed compact semi-automatic pistol. Gun. Screams tore through the ballroom as guests threw themselves beneath tables, scattering wine glasses and silverware. Julian leveled the barrel straight at Sarah's chest, his finger tightening on the trigger. "If I'm going to hell, you're coming with me, you ungrateful whore." In that split second, the world slowed to an agonizing crawl. The pain in my head, the jagged metal fragment that had tormented me for 5 years, seemed to burn away under a sudden, blinding surge of pure adrenaline. My body moved before my brain could register the thought. I didn't feel the weakness in my legs. I didn't feel the dizzying vertigo. I lunged forward, throwing my entire body over Sarah, spinning her around and shielding her completely with my chest and back. Bang. A deafening gunshot echoed through the hall. A searing, white-hot agony tore through my left shoulder, the kinetic force, knocking both of us backward onto the stage floor. No, Ethan. Sarah's scream was a sound of absolute, soul-shattering terror. Bang, bang. 2 sharp cracks from the police tactical officers echoed an instant later. Julian took 2 rounds to the chest, collapsing onto the mahogany stage, his gun clattering away across the floor as his blood pooled on the white tablecloths. I lay on my back, gasping for air. The pain from the gunshot wound was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the catastrophic pressure building inside my skull. The sudden physical exertion and impact had caused the shrapnel to shift millimeters deeper, pressing directly against the main arterial branch of my brain. Blood began to pour freely from my nose and the corner of my mouth. Ethan, look at me. Stay with me. Sarah was on her knees, pressing her silk skirt against my bleeding shoulder with one hand, cradling my head with the other, her tears raining down onto my cheeks like a storm. Sarah, I rasped, my vision fading into a thick, milky white fog. I lifted my trembling right hand, my bloody fingers touching her tear-streaked cheek. I kept my promise. I didn't let anyone hurt you. Don't talk like that. Dr. Thorne is outside. The ambulance is here, she sobbed, hysterically, screaming at the paramedics rushing onto the stage. Hurry up. Save him. If he dies, I will tear the city apart. Sarah? My breath grew shallow, a faint, peaceful smile touching my lips. The custard was delicious. My hand slipped from her cheek, falling limp onto the stage floor. The last sound I heard before the universe faded into absolute pitch black silence was the desperate, breaking cry of the girl I had loved for 2 lifetimes. For 12 hours, the red iron operation light outside Surgical Suite 1 at St. Jude's Memorial Hospital never turned off. Inside Dr. Kenneth Thorne and 6 senior neurosurgeons stood around the operating table under the glare of high-intensity surgical lamps, their hands working with microscopic precision. Blood pressure dropping 70/40. Administer 2 units of packed red cells. Prep the microlaser cautery. The fragment is entangled with the posterior cerebral artery, 1 millimeter off, and he strokes out permanently. We need suction. Suction now. Outside in the waiting corridor, Serafina sat on the cold floor against the wall. She had refused to change out of her evening gown. The crimson silk was stained with my dried blood, stiff and dark around the collar and waist. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her hands clasped tightly around the silver dolphin hair clip, her eyes fixed on the red surgical light. Behind her stood 20 executive board members, city officials, and police representatives, all waiting to speak with the new, undisputed controller of the combined Gray Sterling financial empire. She didn't look at any of them. She didn't say a single word. Whenever someone tried to approach her with legal documents or merger confirmations, her personal security detail stepped forward, turning them away. To her, the $70 billion empire meant less than the dirt on the soles of my shoes. At 7 a.m., the blizzard outside finally subsided, allowing the pale, golden rays of dawn to pierce through the high glass windows of the hospital lobby. The heavy stainless steel doors of Surgical Suite 1 hissed open. Dr. Thorne walked out, his surgical cap soaked in sweat, his mask hanging loose around his neck. Sarah shot up from the floor so fast she nearly collapsed from exhaustion, rushing to the doctor's side, her hands clutching his scrub sleeves with terrifying strength. Doctor. Her voice was barely human, a ragged, breathy gasp. Is he? Dr. Thorne took a long, deep breath, looked at the exhausted girl before him, and slowly pulled a small, sterilized glass vial from his pocket. Inside the vial rested a jagged, rusted piece of blackened steel, no larger than a fingernail, stained with oxidized tissue. The metal fragment has been completely excised, Dr. Thorne said, a weary, triumphant smile spreading across his face. The arterial repair held. The cranial pressure has stabilized. Mr. Gray is alive, Miss Vance. Sarah stared at the glass vial. Her hands slowly unclasped from the doctor's coat. She dropped to her knees, pressed the silver dolphin clip to her forehead and wept, not with despair, not with terror, but with the boundless, overwhelming joy of a soul that had finally walked out of hell. 3 months later, spring had returned to the city. The Gray family ancestral estate, once overgrown with weeds and sealed by bankruptcy courts, had been fully restored to its former glory. The high wrought iron gates were painted black and gold, and the gardens were blooming with thousands of pristine white camellias, my mother's favorite flower. I sat in a wooden rocking chair on the sunlit veranda, wearing a soft cream cashmere sweater, holding a steaming mug of black tea. The surgical scar on my temple had faded to a thin, silver line beneath my thick, dark hair. My cheeks had regained their healthy color, the blinding migraines were gone forever, and the tremor in my hands had completely vanished. The glass French doors behind me clicked open. Sarah stepped out onto the porch. She wasn't wearing business suits, diamond chokers, or corporate heels. She wore a simple white sundress, her hair flowing freely in the warm spring breeze, carrying a fresh plate of warm, homemade egg custard. "You're not supposed to be out in the draft without your scarf," she scolded. Gently, though her eyes were filled with endless, radiant warmth. She set the plate on the small wicker table, pulled up a wooden stool, and sat right beside me, resting her chin comfortably on my knee, looking up at me just like she used to when she was 14. "Arthur Sterling was sentenced to life without parole this morning," she said softly. "The company has officially been restructured under the Gray Holdings name. Everything your father built, it's all back." I set my teacup down, reached out, and gently ran my fingers through her soft hair, feeling the familiar, smooth silver dolphin clip holding her bangs back. "Sarah," I said softly. All those years ago, when I forced you to be my girlfriend, I was an arrogant, jealous brat. I thought I could control you with money and power." She smiled, leaning her cheek deeper into the palm of my hand. "I know. And when I left 5 years ago, I thought I was being noble, but I was just a coward running away from my own helplessness." "I know that too," she murmured, her eyes softening into deep pools of tenderness. I leaned down, our faces inches apart, looking into the eyes that had held on to my memory through 5 years of darkness, blood, and corporate warfare. "Serafina Vance," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't have a sponsor's contract for you anymore. I don't have threats, and I don't have money to trade. All I have is a heart that beats only because of you." I pulled a small velvet box from my pocket, revealing a simple, flawless platinum ring set with a single teardrop diamond. "Will you marry me? Not as a debt, not as a duty, but as the only woman I will ever love for the rest of my life?" Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. She threw her arms around my neck, burying her face into my chest, her lips brushing against my jaw. "Yes," she whispered, her voice carrying across the sunlit garden of white camellias. "1,000 times yes." I wrapped my arms tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against my chest, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of our hearts joining into one. The nightmare of the past was finally dead and buried in the cold earth. And under the bright, boundless blue sky of spring, our life had finally begun.